Like when you say no to someone, you're giving somebody else the opportunity to say yes.
Week, if everything is being followed by the plan and it's still not working, the science isn't adding up. So there's something else deeper, as you said, going on.
If you do have like multiple things to do the hardest thing first.
You can relax your nervous 60 or 70% of your nervous system by just the way you speak to yourself.
Not being able to say no, so having no boundaries. I think disorganization is not being organized. Overworking is a big one, and taking on too much, and also being kind of overwhelmed by responsibilities sometimes that we can take on.
Like, what is the worst case scenario of this outcome?
95% of our behaviours and habits are at an unconscious level.
Overwhelm just breeds procrastination.
Like, if somebody else was in your situation, would you be thinking what you're thinking and putting this pressure on yourself? Because 99.9% of the time, you wouldn't.
Hey there, and welcome to the Future Fitness Lifestyle. If you're passionate about staying fit, healthy, and mentally sharp, you're in the right place. I'm your host, Matt Cooney, and each week we dive into the latest trends, expert insights, and actionable tips to help you take your fitness, nutrition, and mental well-being to the next level. Ready to level up your health and fitness? Let's jump in and get started.
Hello everyone, welcome back to the Future Fitness Lifestyle, and today we are talking all about stress again. So this is episode 3 in the series. 2 weeks ago we talked about basically what is stress. Last week we looked at the effects of stress on the body, and this week we're going to start diving into actually how to manage your stress. So the juicy stuff is coming now. And we were just talking, I feel like saying off air as if we're professionals, off air, about Eve. Eve actually did a bit of exposure therapy, which Tommy was talking about last week. Did you, Eve?
Yeah, faced my fears and drove a scooter on a motorway.
And does it work?
In
The second
Bali,
time was
let's
definitely-
say that.
The second time was
roads-
easier. I actually did a lot of deep breathing, so that really helped.
What was your whoop
It's
saying?
funny.
Yeah, whoop.
It actually did
But actually-
come up.
On the way back, we were on the scooter, and the first time we went down, it was kind of scary, and I was like really nervous, but then I was glad after it. Then on the way back, I actually felt even more nervous, and then we were driving under a tunnel, which is like the scariest part of the road, and a plane was like landing right above us. So I was just like gone into overload.
But it's funny that the actual seeing the plane and that stress made the actual other stress not basically easier, because like literally this plane came in front of us, like very, very close as I've been to a plane landing, and like Eve was so freaked out of that the road was fine. And it's funny, she had it. Did she send you the video, Tommy? Actually, she took a video of us doing it. After it, you were like, exposure therapy doesn't work. And then I was like, because she's like, no, I'm worse. And then I was saying like, it's not meant to eliminate it. Like the whole thing is not that you will never have the fear, but now the next time, and it's like the thoughts of it. Because even you said it, you were like, okay, it actually wasn't as bad as I thought. And then the thing what that happened after it is we went on this other kind of shortcut that I take usually, and Eve gets scared on it. She was fine. And I was like, do you know what just happened there? And she was like, what? I was like, because you went on the other road, you didn't say one word when we were going through this shortcut. She's like, yeah, I'm not actually afraid of that anymore. And I was like, yeah, because you experienced that stress now, you realize, oh yeah, this one isn't half as bad.
Just replace one stressor with another.
That's adaptation to stress. That's what happened. And it proved your point. It really does work. So today, what we're going to talk about, we're going to look at stress management, but we're going to talk specifically about mental and emotional stress. Because in my opinion, and in my experience, this has the biggest impact on people. And it's because when you're under physical stress, it's quite easy to detect. You know when you're physically tired, in pain, aches, all that. You don't necessarily know when you're under a high amount of emotional or mental stress. Some people kind of do, but it takes a lot of awareness. And we've said it on previous episodes. I think you said it, Tommy, is like a lot of people are just unaware of how much actual stress that they're under. And I think a big amount of that comes from the emotional and mental stressors that we have in our lives. So the things I'm talking about here are the main ones I want to talk about today are overwhelm, worrying, expectations and pressure, both internally and externally, uncertainty, relationships, fear and self-doubt, and trauma and traumatic experiences that we've gone through in our lives. So with these, there's kind of like 3 different levels. And the way I want to do today, because when you talk about stress management, there's so many things you can do to manage your stress, right? And I look at it like you have your stress management toolbox. You want to use the right tools for the job. So certain things may be really beneficial for certain stressors that you're under. And I'm sure we're going to get to like some kind of foundational things that maybe like everybody should be doing to manage stress. But I feel like what would be really beneficial for people is knowing that, okay, if I'm feeling really overwhelmed or if I'm worrying a lot, maybe these are the things that I can go to help doing that. So that's what we're going to go through it is maybe go through them one by one and look at like how that type of stress impacts us and then what we can do to kind of combat it. And with it, there's kind of 3 levels with stress. We can look at the acute stress, which is short-term things. So think of, could be, a deadline, an argument you have, an unexpected event. Then we have chronic stress, which is, we know from previous episodes, if you've been listening, that's ongoing long-term stuff. So again, this could be in your life, could be toxic relationships, could be financial struggles, whatever it may be. Then we also have traumatic stress, which is deep emotional stress from past kind of trauma and experiences. So I kind of think with those as well, it kind of looks, those 3 levels, a lot of that traumatic stress can be unconscious. So it's on a deep level. That chronic stress is kind of on a conscious level, like we know it's happening, but maybe we're not equipped, we're not dealing with it, or we're not equipped with the skills to be able to deal with it. And then the acute stress really is about taking action. So it's kind of short term and looking at taking action on it. That's what I kind of want to touch on today. Any thoughts from the crew here? By the way, we're not here, we're 4 out of 5. Sharon isn't here today, but we have Ro, Tommy, Eve, if you're listening and can't see. I haven't let anyone speak yet.
I think you covered, I was almost listening to all that. It was kind of going down the layers, and then you got right to the trauma right at the end when you were speaking about that. But I think it is going to be important to be able to talk about emotional stress because we are emotional creatures, and our ability or inability to manage and deal with our emotions, I would say, has such a major influence on how we function throughout the day and how our stress manifests in our life. And I think it's going to be a very important subject to touch on, and I'm sure there's going to be lots of little nuggets to come out of this conversation.
And I was actually thinking when we first kind of set up the podcast, I remember one of my things was kind of like, I wonder if we run out of things to talk about. But as we've been doing them now, I'm like, the problem isn't things to talk about, it's actually time. And talking too much, because I'm like, we're not at the Joe Rogan stage of being able to record for like 3 hours per podcast, but I'm like, it's actually, there's so much I want to talk about. And even here today, like, I think with what we're going to do now, because I want to kind of start with I want to go deep first and then come back out. So I want to start with kind of the traumatic stress. This is a huge topic, and as Tommy is probably going to speak into a little bit, it could be a Joe Rogan podcast in itself. So I don't want to go like way too far into the weeds with it, but I think it's really important to bring this up first because traumatic stress, the way I put it is, we could give you all the stress management techniques in the world and all these little short-term things. If you have deep-rooted trauma that you haven't dealt with, that's not going to, all these little things isn't going to fix it. Like, it's one of those, in my opinion, it's one of those things you have to do some deep work on it. You have to go back to those experiences. Again, this is why I'm working with professionals, and I'm not experienced or qualified in this area, but I've seen it before. And it was actually Luke Lehman that said it to me. One of the things he mentioned, that if somebody, say, with a plan for fat loss is following everything to a T and nothing is happening, he was like, I can almost guarantee you there's trauma involved with it. And he was like, You probably don't need a nutritionist. You need a counselor or a therapist to kind of unpack some of the previous experiences that you've been through. And, you know, I've said it on a previous podcast, even with like obesity linked with kind of sexual abuse, things like that. So there is like a lot of issues that kind of like arise with it, you know, and it's one of those things where, for me, in my opinion, it's like the 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 solution, not the solution, is that deep work that you have to kind of do. I don't know, Tommy, I'm going to kind of ask you on this. What are your kind of thoughts? Hopefully I'm right with that.
Yeah, no, it was actually you 100%. I know it's something that you said to me, or even just this week, if everything is being followed by the plan and it's still not working, the science isn't adding up. So there's something else deeper, as you said, going on. And just even going back to trauma, just touching on that trauma. Trauma essentially stems from the Greek word wound. So that's actually where it comes from. And essentially, if you had a traumatic event in your life, which, to be honest, most of us had, nearly every single one of us have had some sort of traumatic experience, and it doesn't have to be obviously like a very severe case of sexual abuse or physical abuse or anything like that. We can all be traumatized in certain ways. Me and you, Matt, could be in one experience, and it might affect me in a way that it may not affect you at all. And with trauma, how it essentially works is, when you're talking about deep work, if you look at the layers of the brain, so you have like the first layer, which is the prefrontal cortex, obviously, which manages our thought functions and our decision-making abilities. And below that, then you have the emotional brain, where our memories are stored and our emotional regulation, or fight or flight. And then below that, then, is you have the reptilian brain, so the deepest part of the brain. And essentially what happens to us when we're having a traumatic experience is we essentially go into survival mode. So if you can like think of those layers of the brain, your first layer is shut off, your cognitive function is gone. The emotional side of you is also shut off because you've just gone into complete survival, because literally it's just literally operating the functions that is just trying to keep you alive. And that emotional part of your brain, where your memory is stored, that's why people can't remember their traumatic experiences, because essentially that part of their brain is just completely shut off. So what happens then is you'd start to create, obviously, associations around that experience, whatever you did in that moment to help you survive. This is why like human psychology like really fascinates me. I remember hearing this story before about a guy who was kidnapped, and he was essentially put down. He was kind of locked away in this room, and essentially what actually triggered him when he got found and released, and what actually triggered him, what brought up the overwhelming feelings for that traumatic experience, was the sound of footsteps. So when he was in a room, the sound of footsteps coming towards the door meant to him that obviously these people were coming into him. So when he went out into the real life, essentially anytime he heard like footsteps, he would just go into survival mode, and he was completely unaware of why that was the case. Trauma can really affect us in like so many ways. It can really stop our ability to function day-to-day life. And if you have unresolved trauma, it really is going to impact how you operate and how you live your daily life, and it's essentially going to prevent you from doing a lot of the things that you probably want to do in life, just because of the overwhelming feelings that come with that, the amount of stress that you're carrying around because of that traumatic experience.
Do you think a lot of it is unconscious for people, so they're not aware of it?
Oh yes, massively, because essentially that's a survival technique. As I said, that part of your brain, that memory part, that conscious part of you just completely gets switched off. And I think it's like 90%, or could even be 95% of our behaviors and habits are at an unconscious level. Really, our conscious mind is only operating at like 5%. So you can imagine just vast amount of experiences, memories, feelings that are locked away in your unconscious. And at the very bottom of that is those traumatic events, because essentially you don't want to recall those memories because they're so overwhelming. They're literally, whatever the experience was, obviously pushing you to the brink of survival. So it's the last thing you want to do, is to be able to recall those memories. And that's why with therapy, it needs to be a very slow process with that. You couldn't just first session in bring someone in and tell them, hey, how are you? Okay, talk to me about your traumatic experiences. Because essentially the way our bodies work, as we both know, your mind doesn't know the difference between reality and what's in front of you. So when you're recalling those type of situations, what happens is it brings up the exact same feelings that you went through in that traumatic experience. So you can imagine how overwhelming that would be for someone to recall that and to essentially relive that, because that is essentially what's happening to the body, is it's reliving that experience again.
Isn't that what PTSD is for people that are in war, essentially? They continually get triggered. They feel like they're back in the war. It's like, and you obviously, we know from, I don't know if you've watched war stuff, if you're into that before, like the actual, how much of an effect it has on people's lives, like people who have been to war, even after, like mental health struggles, I think a lot of suicides, things. There's been so many different things. I presume a lot of we're in America and stuff, but in general, and that's essentially what happens for them, you know. And I think it's really interesting. And you said it, like that most people are, like, it's unconscious, so we're not really aware. And also that trauma is, like, again, you don't have to have went to war to have trauma. And I think a lot of people, I would even probably be in that boat of going, well, like, this happened to me, but look at it, oh, everything so much worse has happened to everyone else, you know. So it's kind of like you're playing a game of, yeah, mine can't be as bad as theirs because they went through this. But again, like you said, Tom, it's like your own experience dictates the response. It's not graded in it like, oh yeah, because you only experienced this, someone who experienced 10 times worse and your scale is worse off, you know. I think that's really important, because you can try nearly overlook your own experiences, essentially.
Yeah.
And yeah,
I
go on,
think
Ron.
it's also important to, like, the stigma around therapy. I know for us, anyway, growing up and the generations before us, the stigma around therapy and actually talking about things was so negative that, like, even like Matt was saying, like, if you did have a small trauma, they're like, oh, there's no point talking about this. This is not going to affect me. And we've been told to get over it and to kind of move on. And something that's like, life could have been worse. So it's like, oh, we should get over it. But it's like, it also depends on what age you were when said trauma happened. Because if you were a very young child and something happened to you, that's going to affect that child so much more than if it happened maybe an older person who had a bit more awareness. And the longer you go on without actually dealing with it, it's like a ripple effect through your life, affecting being triggered and dealing with stuff. So it's like the stigma around therapy and even like talking about things has been so negative, I think, up until this point. Over the last couple of years, it's obviously getting a lot more spoken about, but that would have been a big thing to kind of stop people from even thinking about talking about their past.
Yeah.
I remember my lecturer telling us before that it's like 99.3% of the world or something is traumatized. We were like, I wonder where that 0.7% of people are living. They're living on some island where they're just grown up in this like perfect life.
So I thought I was a 0.7. Like, I've obviously read like a lot about, you know, like your childhood experiences shapes who you are, and that only up until a couple of years ago, I would have swore blindly to you that my childhood didn't affect me. It's nothing got to do with who I am today. And it's like, that's where my own bias, and like you said, weirdly enough, I can't remember a lot of experiences in childhood, and it's not that like they were really bad. It's just like a block in my head. So the therapist or coach told me, and it's funny because you only did a post about this, Tom. It's like, yeah, I would have just swore that it didn't affect me. You know, even for me, I obviously moved country, went through a split household and stuff like that, and it's like I was 100% certain until a few years ago that didn't affect my life one bit. It's like, okay. And then I realized, yeah, obviously you're just maybe haven't dealt with it, or you put it away in a box, that it really actually has.
Well, essentially, it's like what would you with all of us, we just create a belief around it that that part of our life didn't affect us and it didn't have an impact in us, because like you said, all those feelings are like blocked away in a box, and you're like, I don't want to go near there, because essentially the perception and the reality too is that if you open up that box, it's very difficult to see what might come out of it, which it is, because internal work, therapy, mindset work, sort of space that you're going to be talking through your feelings or experiences is really challenging. It's very, very difficult, so it is. But I also always say with that statement that it's very, very rewarding, because you're releasing those emotions from whatever experience you had at that time, that's created these beliefs around yourself, and essentially you're letting them go and you're allowing in new space to create new feelings and new beliefs, and essentially what we are as human beings is we are meant to be open-minded, where we're not meant to hold on to experiences, positive and negative. It's the whole idea about being actually present, is that we simply generate an experience and we feel it and then we let it go. There's a huge stop from 2 to 3 there with human beings. We hold on to experiences, both positive and negative. As I said, that's where the blocked emotions come in, and that's where we have to unpack them and to see what they're trying to tell us.
Yeah. And I think before we move on, because I think with trauma and that type of stress, you're not going to find an answer here in this podcast, but you can maybe get the direction or a push listening to this to be like, okay, imagine I am maybe part of that 99.3% that has been through some stuff. Yeah, definitely recommend maybe delving down that direction. But what I want to do now is go more into the other areas that we mentioned already that are maybe a bit softer, and look at ways we can help you manage those stresses. So the first one is overwhelm. And I think we're all can agree here. We've all experienced and still do levels of overwhelm at one point or another. Correct?
Yes.
Right.
And I think these come from not saying no, not being able to say no. So having no boundaries. I think disorganization, not being organized, overworking is a big one, and taking on too much, and also being kind of overwhelmed by responsibilities sometimes that we, again, take on. So anyone got either any ways that maybe helps them to manage overwhelm, or anything else on that causes it?
I definitely think for me with overwhelm, like it could be work, or you might have like a million things to do. Like the main thing that would help me is actually prioritizing tasks and, breaking it down in, okay, what exactly do I need to do? And definitely I've got better with this over the years, but I would have been someone that, if you have a very busy week or you've a million things to do, that I would kind of nearly freeze and not be able to take action, because I'm just thinking, okay, I have a million things to do. How am I going to get everything done? And as a result, then you're actually not even able to do anything. And just, you feel worse then because you're not getting through it. You're not able to take action. It's piling up and you're just getting more stressed and more overwhelmed. And it's kind of like a vicious cycle. Whereas now I definitely think in the last couple of years, especially in the last year, that I'm actually able to take on more. I'm able to do a lot more because I'm able to kind of prioritize a lot better. And I definitely think like the main thing that helps is, if you have 10 things to do, and that book that we actually read, Matt, was it The One Thing? That book, I think there was loads of little nuggets in that. That's definitely a good book. But really just like if you have a lot of things to do, actually planning out your day. What's the priority? What's the worst or the hardest task on that list, and start with that, focus on that, get that finished, and then move on to the next thing. And I think that definitely helped. And I what I find really helps me is if you do have like multiple things to do the hardest thing first, because once you've tackled that, it just feels like the rest is so much easier because you've already done the hardest thing. That's definitely something I found has really helped with overwhelm.
I think also, Matt, you said it, the setting boundaries and learning to say no and actually protect your energy is huge. And I think something that everyone struggles with. It's so hard to set boundaries. And to prioritize yourself in that way. But it's so important, especially when you're feeling overwhelmed and you feel like you're trying to do everything for everybody else. Saying no is essential. And something I read a while ago was how to deal with setting boundaries is like when you say no to someone, you're giving somebody else the opportunity to say yes. That might be more aligned with that person, or that might be better in that scenario. And it's something I kind of remind myself is when I do say no, instead of feeling that guilt, knowing that like I'm giving somebody else an opportunity to say yes, and it kind of helps ease that. But definitely setting boundaries is a huge thing to help with overwhelm.
Yeah, and we've said it before. There's little. I think we say no. Say no to small things first. It doesn't have to be big, and it's just you build that muscle and that repetition of getting used to going. No, I can't do that. Sorry, I can't.
Yeah, because if you're someone as well that is constantly saying yes and taking on too much, it can be really hard to start saying no. And I know for a lot of people that like they just can't do it. So really just starting with something small, and the more you actually say no, you'll actually see that, okay, nothing bad's happened. You know, that person doesn't hate me, and you can say no more often. And then as a result, you just manage that overwhelm so much better.
Yeah, and remind yourself how good it feels when you do say no. Like actually stop and be like, oh, I'm so happy that I said no to that, because now I have more time for myself, or I'm able to relax. And you're just, again, reaffirming and reminding yourself that you haven't, quote unquote, made a mistake by saying no or something like that.
I was actually overwhelmed last night as I was hearing you speak. I was like, that was literally me last night. I got home like late, and again, I am a very kind of up here person. I'm doing a lot more to try and feel into myself rather than just come out with my mind. Because definitely when I have, let's say, like a lot of things on, I just get caught up in the thoughts, and it was like that last night. I was like, oh my god, I just have a lot of things on today, and I was like, how am I going to do all this? I have so much things to do. I have like appointments. I need to get here, and I need to work too, and I need to get into town. But it was just like you said, I was like, okay, Tommy, just sit down there for a second. Let's just pack your bag for tomorrow. Let's start with that, and like just doing like small things. Because planning beats anxiety. When we get overwhelmed, we feel anxious. It's because like everything is scarred.
Yeah.
So if you can like sit down and have like a map of like, okay, this is what I need to do. This is the action I need to take. Okay, well, I'm going to take this action. Okay, that brings down the overwhelm, so it does. And touching on what you were talking about with the saying no, the boundaries is definitely such a big one. And I know it's not Irish people aren't great at doing, because essentially we have a tendency to look after others before we look after ourselves. And it was a client actually I had the other night, who essentially had at the end of the call, just their overriding feeling from the end of it was just like that they were so happy that they were able to give themselves just that space for themselves rather than having to look after everyone else. And it's trying to remember that feeling that you have for putting yourself first, and how good that you can feel because of that. Because as we all know, if we can feel good in ourselves, well, then we can go and tend to others then, so we can.
Yeah. And it's funny. Overwhelm just breeds procrastination. And that's where I look at it like, essentially it's having too much to do with not enough time. And Eve said it there, and even like a visualization of it for me is like, imagine having a list of 1 to 10, and it's like in order, exactly what to do. That's like the planning and having a checklist. It's like, okay, double that, and now put the words everywhere on a screen. So it's like all over the place. That's essentially overwhelm. It's like everything is everywhere. There's no structure to it. And it's just like, what do I do here? You know? And even for me, I was kind of looking at it like, okay, if I wanted to overwhelm myself as much as possible, what would I do right now? I'd turn my notifications on, and I'd delete Google Calendar and my diary. I'd take them away from me. I'd be like, yeah, that would be a full-on meltdown mode. Opposite to that, okay, what is the things that I need? My calendar to plan. Planning is going to be the number one thing. I like to, a few of you said it, like time blocking is really good, because if you have this list of things to do, you time block them. You then realize actually, I can't do all this. It's literally just not in the time to do it. So it's like, okay, now we need to come up with a different solution to this because it's just physically not possible. Calendar and planning is a big one. I like to use then a system of automate, delegate, eliminate. It's like automate is, can we do this more efficiently? So instead of taking 2 hours, can I do it in an hour? Delegating is, can someone else actually do it for me? And again, this could be even as simple as, can your husband drop the kids to soccer instead of you? Little things. And eliminate is, do I actually need to do this? And there's some amount of stuff in our lives that if you really look at it and go, actually, hold on, I don't need to do this at all. And like, if you can do those, you're going to drastically bring down your overwhelm. And Eve, you said it, this is the other kind of points, prioritizing, using checklists. And I like the word focus. So focus stands for follow one course until successful. A lot of overwhelm is when you start something and you don't finish it. So you have 25 things. This is kind of my Fridays, actually, why I get so stressed on Fridays is I have 20 things to do, but I haven't finished them. Yes. And then it's like, you forget, then that's when you forget stuff. So that's another one. And then you guys said it, saying no, setting boundaries. I actually think with overwhelm as well, have the mentality of less is more. Like doing less is actually better. And I think one last one that I had was actually disconnecting. So if you can spend time just getting away from everything, you come back and you're much more clear, level-headed. And like, even for me, I have like slow Sundays is my thing. It's like, if I can just disconnect for 24 hours, come back, I'm going to think much more clearly, going to be in a better mood. And it drastically helps. Like if I've done the other things, if I have those other things, overwhelm doesn't get too bad, still going to experience it, but I can disconnect, come back, and I'm kind of ready to tackle the world again.
I think another thing there, Matt, you kind of mentioned it, is asking for help. Like if there's a task that you can ask your husband to drop the kids, because a lot of times, again, we're very bad for asking for help because we assume nobody can help us or we'll do it ourselves. But actually asking for something simple like that could be easy to somebody who's not overwhelmed. And then another thing, Tommy mentioned it as well, is a lot of like writing stuff down is great to get it out of your head, but sometimes we also need to like move our bodies. So even like getting up and just moving, getting outside, jumping around, moving your energy about can just help you focus again and kind of shake it out of your body, which I think is very important as well. Like getting it out of your head, but also working with your body can help.
That's actually a good point that Roshan said there about moving, getting out of your body, because we often talk a lot about the flight response. But when we go into that freeze response, well, essentially we don't know what to do. We essentially become immobile. And as Roshan said, what's actually really good for people in that when they kind of go into that state, they are overwhelmed, but it's their inability to be able to do nothing, and that actually prevents them from coming out of it. So as Roshan said, like honestly, like do some jumping jacks, anything like that, like something that is literally going to get you out of that state, to just get your body moving again, can be really, really actually helpful.
Yeah, somatic work. It's the energy gets stuck in your body, and you essentially just need to like shake it up, and then it starts moving again, and everything clears up a bit. But somatic work is the stuff when you see people jumping around and you're like, what are they doing? It's actually very beneficial. I won't do any here.
That's what you need to do when you're on a plane.
I want to put an overlay of you saying this, Ro, with like actual people, somatic work on that.
It's all this.
It's all crazy.
So the next one I want to move on to, because we have a few to get through, is worrying. Something that's come up a lot lately with a lot of clients, people in general, is just this constant state of worry. And what I find that is like, it's often about the future or the past. It's never really the present. And people being very kind of uncertain and just experiencing, I think people they label themselves as well. Like you'll often hear, I'm a worrier. And I always feel like that's like a old Irish mammy thing, isn't that? Constantly worrying. But does anyone have any thoughts on worry or any ways to kind of manage it? Again, it's something I think we all experience at times, Even I do. Eve actually said the other day, she's like, do you ever worry about anything? I'm like, yes, but not really.
You actually don't.
You give all your worry to Eve. Eve just takes it on for both of you.
Yeah, it's that energy. I'm just like flowing it this way. just goes past me.
Worry is actually a really interesting one. Yes, totally. Every single person worries. Of course we do. It's a natural human behavior, so it is. But for people who tend to ruminate, it's just a coping mechanism for them to feel safe. And I know that sounds very ironic, but people who tend to ruminate find it very hard to take action. And essentially, it's the inaction that is actually protecting them from maybe certain feelings that they don't want to have. That's why they might have a tendency to ruminate on things, because essentially it prevents them from actually going and actually doing the thing that maybe that they believe that there's going to be a certain feeling at the end of it. That's could be one of the primary functions of why people worry, is just that inability to take action, because maybe they're afraid whatever it is that they're actually going to do is going to bring about pain or a feeling of rejection or hurt. So their way of dealing with that is to ruminate on it without actually being able to take any action on it.
Yeah. And Tommy, quick question. So if you were worried right now about something, what would you do? What would your first course of action be? Putting you on the spot.
Breathe into it.
Nice.
Honestly, if I'm starting to worry about something, I am a logical person. Breathe into it, then I'll try and rationalize it out. Okay, what am I actually worried about here? What are the consequences of what might happen if this scenario plays out? And a lot of that as well is control. What can I control here with this? What can't I control? Okay, I can't control the outcome of this scenario, so I need to do my very best to let it go. Because a lot of worry is us wanting to control the outcome. And I know it's something you had already said it from the start, we may go into it, is uncertainty. But it's just trying to let go of the control of, I can control my emotions right now. I can regulate myself. I can observe my thoughts. I can plan out what may happen, but I need to let go of a lot of things that I can't control her.
Yeah. And you said being logical, because that, go ahead.
Go on. Yeah, no, I think even with worry as well is something that I find very beneficial is the worst case scenario, even writing it down, what is the worst case scenario of this outcome? Because usually when you actually put it down on paper and get it out, it's not as bad as we make it out to be. And another thing with worry, a huge thing I think, is the relationship you have with yourself. Because I used to be somebody who woke up every morning, and from the moment I woke up to the moment I went to sleep, it was just constant worry about stuff, because I was so unsure of myself and didn't have the belief in myself. And I think the stronger you have a better relationship you have with yourself, and the more you can trust yourself, the less you'll be worrying about certain little things, because you've a belief in yourself. And I think another thing with your nervous system and relaxing your nervous system helps so much with stress. And one of the things that will help that so much is your self-talk. I think you can relax your 60 or 70% of your nervous system by just the way you speak to yourself, which we can all work on. That will help with the worrying, because the stronger you feel about yourself, the less you'll be worrying about the little things.
And it's funny, Tommy, you said about being logical. A thing that I heard that kind of blew my mind, and then it kind of reframed it for me, is 92% of the things we worry about don't ever happen. So when I'm worried, my logical brain goes 9.2 out of 10 times, this doesn't even happen. I'm like, okay. And then I use what's the worst case scenario, is what Rose said. That's another really good one. It's what's the worst case? Can I cope with that? Okay, fine. Then there's actual attitude of gratitude. If you can, like Rose said, with your own relationship with yourself, if you have a growth mindset and you're grateful, because again, a lot of worry is it's not that you're ungrateful, but you don't think about the positive things. You're worrying about all this stuff that could happen, versus if you can actually be present and be grateful for the things you have, and know that, again, if you do have that, I'm not saying just believe the world is rosy, everything's going to work out, but if you have that kind of positive outlook and knowing okay, I'm more I might lose my job, but I could get a better one. You know, my business might go bust, but I could build a bigger one. So it's understanding that. I think when you're in that negative, every worry becomes catastrophized to this is going to happen, then this is going to happen, then this is going to happen, versus taking the more positive approach towards it,
Yeah, I
Yeah,
think
and I
even
definitely think, and sorry, another thing that can,
no, go Eve, go
No
you go.
worries. There's no worries here. Don't worry.
go Eve.
Eve, you go.
Okay, another thing that can actually help, and I know a lot of my clients would use this, is kind of, if you're someone who's worrying or maybe overthinking a lot, is actually scheduling worry time. I know that might sound a bit kind of crazy, but like if you're spending the whole day worrying about something and it's on your mind all day, you're constantly overthinking, you're going around in like an anxious state, it's kind of causing you a lot of stress. Actually trying to condense that to saying, okay, right, this is what I'm worrying about. I'm worrying about this. It's on my mind. If I can just put aside a certain time of the day to actually allow myself to worry about that. And then as you're going about your day, you might have a little worry pop up or have that kind of anxious thought. But what you can actually do then is like, okay, no, I'm not going to think about that now. I have going to think about it later when I have that time put aside for it. And when you put that time aside, it could be like 10 minutes, 15 minutes where you're just going to write down what you're worried about, allow yourself to think about, allow yourself to worry about it. But during the rest of the day, if it kind of comes up, you're just going to say, no, I'm going to put it off till then. And that can actually kind of just help reduce that stress, kind of gives you a bit more like of a sense of control. Over time, you'll kind of end up worrying a lot less. And yeah, that definitely can be a good technique if you are someone who has a lot of worry and worries a lot.
It's actually really effective. It sounds weird, but it
Yeah,
actually
it
is.
does. It sounds weird, but I've actually tried it and it definitely does work.
And there's two more that I have for worry, and then we'll go on to the next one is cold water immersion. Actually, there was a study on it that came out very, very recently, and it showed that even one session of cold water immersion reduced people's worry. And then after like 4 weeks of consistent use, something like 4 times less worrying, or there's a big impact on it. So definitely, if you're worried, and Eve said this before, is like when you're in cold water, you're not worried about what's going on, everything else. You're just worried about the water. And the other one that I had was actually just talking to somebody, and that just having connection with other people. Because when we're worrying, it's in our own heads. We're usually, we're not usually worrying with each other. It's all we're getting in our own head, and we're thinking these scenarios and things going on. If you can just get out and actually have some social connection, laugh, smile, have fun with people, halftime, you realize actually, oh yeah, that wasn't too bad, And it also can sometimes give you perspective on that situation, because again, a lot of times things we worry about don't really happen, or they're not that bad. As Rose said, they're not really that bad when we look at it. So I think they're definitely really beneficial. The next one I had was expectations and pressure. So this is both like internally and externally. So that internal pressure and expectations we put on ourselves, and then also the pressure we feel from essentially our outside environment. So with this, I put it as like what you're talking about is what Tommy said, I think already, is Irish people tend to be people pleasers. Could be deadlines in work, could be putting others first. Society also has a lot of expectations and pressures, and I've had this conversation a couple times recently with people about like kids, getting a house, being married, all these things that society kind of plays a role in, quote unquote, what we should do. Social media is another big one with the expectations and pressure, comparing yourself to others. And I think perfectionism is another big one for people when it comes to their own internal pressure. Again, for some reason, we presume we have to be perfect when we know nobody else is. So yeah, any thoughts on that, or things maybe that you do to help manage those pressures?
I think a big one is like that inner critic in your head. It's when you have, especially when you put expectations on yourself, and you have that voice. It's like, stop and ask yourself: would you put this pressure on somebody else? Like if somebody else was in your situation, would you be thinking what you're thinking and putting this pressure on yourself? Because 99.9% of the time you wouldn't. And I think doing that and reframing it and pulling it out and looking at yourself as like a third person almost really helps with taking that pressure off and that expectation off yourself. because you wouldn't treat anybody else like that.
Yeah, and I think with that, with the unrealistic expectations and perfectionism, well, you're doing that behavior for some reason. It's solving some problem for you. Obviously, it's a very maladaptive approach to take to life, but I think it's trying to peel back the layers of why do you have unrealistic expectations on yourself, and why do things need to be perfect for you? Is there a fear of failure? Is there a fear of success? What is it that is the underlying core belief with that? Because those are simply just symptoms of that belief. How I best deal with it, definitely when it comes to expectations or maybe comparison, compassion. Compassion is such a big emotional tool for me to be able to help alleviate the feelings around comparison in particular too, because social media, obviously, I know you touched on it, is quite a big one for us all, obviously, just because of the amount of information that you're seeing online. And look, it can all make us feel a certain way, and depending on our own mood that day, what might have happened to us. You never know how you're going to feel when you go onto something, and if it is making you feel maybe negative about yourself, as Rush said with the inner critic, and that compassion is such a valuable tool to be able to implement for yourself, because when we're suffering, we're great at compounding that suffering by being hard on ourselves. If you can substitute that critical voice with compassion, it helps alleviate the experience so much, and you can essentially allow yourself to come out of it so much quicker, and also you feel better about yourself for using that tool.
Yeah, and I think, like you said, it's kind of the root cause, looking at it, because the result, again, like with people pleasing or putting other people first is like, that's what you're doing, but it's like, why are you doing that? You know, and that's where, again, that can come back to more under the hood reasons. Maybe it's like you don't feel good enough, you feel like you need to be liked, you know, you want to be liked, so you overcompensate by trying to please everybody. I think big one, Tommy, you said there about like even curating your environment. Again, if you're finding yourself comparing yourself to others and social media and stuff, it's like you don't actually have to look at that stuff. Like you can remove a lot of the things that are causing. So it's kind of like maybe looking at some triggers, and it doesn't have to be forever. It's more like if you feel yourself having that pressure and those things are triggering it, you can eliminate it, you know. And one thing for me that I was just thinking, like, especially with like society and that, is if you can be kind of comfortable with who you are and the life you're living, and your decisions that you make, because I think a lot of people, again, believe that external pressure is like, you believe that somebody else is judging you because you haven't done XYZ. So for example, I'm not married, don't have a mortgage, don't have kids, and I'm 35. I could take that as like, people are going to judge me thinking that's what I should be doing. Or I could even think that, you know, that I should be now. I'm this age, when realistically it's like, am I living a life that is in line with who I am and want to be, you know? And it's like, am I comfortable with that? So it's like, when you can live a more, I suppose, aligned life within your values and what you're doing, it doesn't affect you as much, you know? I don't feel that pressure versus somebody else maybe in my situation with that. It's like, I'm doing me, for the lack of a better term, you know.
I think a big thing for people to feel a sense of comfortability with that is that it's okay to have them thoughts. It's okay to have them feelings. It's okay to have them, as I said, those thoughts of like, maybe like, I should be doing this. What's important is what comes after that. Do you ruminate on those thoughts? Do you start to associate those thoughts and identify those thoughts as yourself? Or do you start to maybe reflect on that and be like, that's interesting. I just noticed I had a thought about that. What happened to me in this moment? I wonder why I had that thought. Where did that come from? What does that mean? And then just trying to explore that rather than being very reactive to that. And as I said, identifying yourself with that thought. Essentially how you're going to be able to take back control of when those experiences are going to come up for you. Because if you become reactive to them, then you're just going to keep on becoming reactive to the same situation, the same experience.
Yeah, and I think even that, because a lot of the times the expectations that we put on ourselves, they're coming from us. Nobody's coming up, a lot of times nobody's coming up to you and be like, you should be doing this, you should be doing that. It's us thinking, oh, we should be doing this, we should be doing that. So like Tommy said, when you're able to stop and be like, why am I having this thought? Where is it coming from? You're able to dissect it a little bit and then take action on whether you want to use it to boost you and motivate you to do something, or you decide not to listen to it.
The next, we still have 3 different stressors I want to really talk about, which is uncertainty, relationships, which Tommy is a big one, and fear and self-doubt. But we are out of time today because it's going to take at least another 40 minutes to probably get through the 3 of them. So what we're going to do, we're going to leave it there for today. I think there's tons of value to be taken away from how to manage your stress when it comes to overwhelm, worrying, and just the expectations and pressure we put on ourselves. And I think we all will experience them to a certain point. And I think it's more about, again, the word is management. It's like managing it and having the tools in our toolbox to know that when we are worried, when we are experiencing overwhelm, or even if we're just feel like we're putting a lot of pressure on ourselves, we have things that we can do we have our go-to tools to take out the toolbox. And so any final thoughts on that before we wrap up? We will do a random question as well. Eve,
I just thought of
experiencing stress right now?
Sorry, I got cut off there, but I'm back in. I think I just literally got a notification on my phone from Headspace, one of those like apps, and it said, when you're feeling overwhelmed, take a walk, feel your body move, and notice your surroundings.
Yeah.
Nice.
That's really weird the way I got that notification when Roisin and Tommy had basically said the exact same things.
This podcast is probably sponsored by Headspace.
Hey, don't say that.
That's where that cuts in.
Got that?
Yeah, but you know, that's how it actually works in those videos on YouTube. They talk about something and then it breaks into the ad of, and you can actually get your first month's free.
Use MCFF for 20% off.
Eve is working for Headspace.
Right, we have a random question. I love this one. What are the top 3 characteristics? Something popped up. What are the top 3 characteristics you feel are important for a person? That is
kindness.
Let's hear that music behind, no?
Kindness, sense of humor.
Honesty.
Kindness, sense of humor, honesty.
What was the question again? What are the 3 characteristics essential for
open-mindedness?
Depends on, like, is this a friend, a partner, a boss?
Just a general person, I think.
If you had let's say you had a child, what would the 3 traits you would want that child to have?
Yeah,
kindness,
a sense of humor, and kindness.
Not my hairline.
Can't think of any other.
Yeah, I think kindness. We also said kindness.
honesty. Would be one for
Yeah,
me.
honesty.
One more.
Loyalty is a big one to me too.
Courage is what I'd say. I'd like them to be
curiosity
or bravery. Curiosity.
Now we have them. Now we have them.
Now we have too many.
Loyal,
Really
honest, kind.
We have 2 people. We split them between 2 people.
Thank
You have half of these, you're good. They're all good though. I like them. Yeah, if you could definitely tick them off in a person, you are doing well. So, guys, thank you for joining us today. I think I really enjoyed it, and I'm looking forward to next week. Yeah, where we will delve into the other 3 stressors, and we still have to get to other types of stress and how to manage that.
Gosh,
there's a lot in it.
And we only spent like 2 minutes talking about cold water.
Yeah.
We're going to have to do a podcast from ice baths at some point.
It'll be the quickest podcast
brilliant.
ever.
Yeah, just be breath sounds, weird sounds.
From ice baths. We'll all sit in an ice bath and have it.
Marbella, the retreat, that's what we'll do. Right, guys, thank you for joining. We will see you all next week.
Thank you. Bye, guys.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks for listening to the Future Fitness Lifestyle. If you found value in today's show, please take a moment to leave us a review and share it with someone who could benefit. Every single review or share helps us grow the show and will allow us to keep bringing you more great content. Stay tuned for weekly episodes where we'll be sharing more tips and insights to help you take your health, fitness and mindset to the next level. Thanks again for joining us, and remember, consistency beats perfection. See you in the next episode.